The Dragonback Series by Timothy Zahn. Book 6. Dragon and Liberator. Chapter 3. The returning shuttles arrived sooner than Allison had expected. Far too soon, unfortunately, for Jack and Dracos to have had time to put together a rescue plan. Neverland and Frost were probably thinking along the same lines. They wasted no time getting their troops and the safe aboard and lifting off again. Allison tried her burglar's pick up a couple of times during the flight, but the safe had apparently been secured someplace away from the passengers, and the background rumble of the engines masked whatever anyone might be saying. There wasn't much conversation going on inside the safe either. Tanim would answer any questions that Allison asked her, mostly questions about how the Kada was doing. But aside from that, she lay quietly against Allison's skin, neither speaking nor moving. Maybe she was conserving oxygen. More likely, she was just terrified. The flight didn't last long. An hour and a half after lifting from Brummagem, Allison felt the subtle jolt as the shuttle docked with another vessel. A few minutes later, the safe was rocked onto a lift cart and rolled through the shuttle's hatchway. 10 minutes and several turns later, they reached their destination. Another short flurry of rockings and bumps to get off the cart, and the safe came to a rest. And once again, silence descended. For the next 2 hours, Allison kept her microphone pressed against the safe wall, splitting her attention between the occasional and very distant background noises and the indicator on her gas mask canister. The gas mask was a marvel of engineering. Along with a small oxygen tank, it included a catalytic recycler that could take their exhaled carbon dioxide and split it back into carbon and oxygen. Without such a converter, a mask that size wouldn't have kept her and Tanim alive for even a single hour. And several times during their quiet vigil, Allison gave their silent thanks that her father had provided her with such exotic and expensive equipment. But even so marvelous a gadget had its limits. The carbon storage tube slowly but steadily filled with a black soot-like powder as the oxygen tank just as slowly but steadily drained. Finally, just under 4 hours into their ill-fated mission, Allison decided it was time. "It's been quiet out there for 2 hours," she told Tanim as she put away the microphone and got out her light. "It should be safe for you to take a look."
"All right,"
Tanim said softly. Allison pressed her back hard against the safe's rear wall. She felt the familiar movement across her skin as Tanim leaned in her strange fourth-dimensional way over the metal. There was a pause, and somehow Allison had a sense that Kada was surprised. There was another wiggle, and Allison looked down through her open collar at Tanim's gray-scaled head, and silver eyes slid back around onto her shoulder. "Is it clear?" she asked.
"Very clear,"
Tanim said.
"and very familiar."
"How familiar?"
"Very,"
Tanim said again, a hint of wry humor finally peeking through her tension.
"We're in the room containing the second safe you opened for Colonel Frost on our journey from Semiline to Brummagem."
Allison felt her mouth drop open. "We're aboard the Avocatus Diabli?"
"Unless there are 2 such rooms,"
Tanim said.
"You're surprised by this?"
"Well, no, I suppose it makes sense," Allison had to admit. "Neverland will certainly want to be on hand for the big attack. I guess I'm just surprised he'd risk his own ship instead of bunking in with Frost and the rest of his people on their warships."
"Perhaps he wishes to travel in comfort,"
Tanim suggested. "There's that," Allison agreed dryly. Malison Ring ships aren't known for the kind of luxury Neverland's accustomed to.
"Malison Ring,"
Tanim said, her voice suddenly thoughtful. "What about them?"
"I was just noticing the curious similarity between your names,"
the Kada said.
"Allison, Malison. Odd that I never noticed that before."
"Pure coincidence," Allison assured her. "Malison is an old Earth word meaning a curse. I presume General Davy was thinking he would be a curse to his enemies when he set up the group 12 years ago."
"They began so recently?"
Tanim asked.
"I assumed they were older than that."
"Not this group, no," Allison said. But they certainly aren't Davy's first experience with mercenaries. He worked for 2 other groups and was one of the commanding officers of a third before he started his own. The Kada cocked her head, an odd-looking gesture as she lay flattened against Allison's skin.
You seem to know a great deal about them.
Not really, Allison said. This was starting to drift toward dangerous territory. Everything I just told you is public record.
Is General Davies' voice print also public record?
Allison grimaced. She'd hoped Tanine had forgotten that part of the trick she and Uncle Verge had pulled on Frost and the Chakuk family. Like I told Uncle Verge, my dad got that for me. The voice prints and tonal patterns of important people can come in handy.
As we saw,
Tanine agreed. That's neither here nor there, Allison said, training her light on the inside of the safe door. Let's get out of here, shall we? There were, as she noted earlier, several small holes in the inner sheet metal. In the single hurried glance she'd had before shutting them inside the safe, it had looked like the holes would give her access to the lock mechanism. It took her less than a minute to discover that they didn't. Don't panic, she ordered herself firmly as she probed around inside with her fingers. The holes had to be there for some reason, after all. If she couldn't manipulate the lock itself, perhaps there was an emergency release back there somewhere. All human-designed safes this big had such releases in case someone accidentally got locked inside. But she couldn't find any such switch.
Is there trouble?
Tanine asked softly. I can't find a way to spring the lock mechanism, Allison told her. We're going to have to try something else, something a bit risky. The Kada shifted position on her skin.
I'm ready.
Allison grimaced. It was more than just a little risky, she knew. But with their air running out, it was all she could think of. Remember that trick Dracos has where he can lean over a wall, like you did just now, only then fall all the way over and come out the other side?
Yes, of course,
Tanine said cautiously.
He also said no other Kada in history has ever had such an ability.
I know, Allison said, but I think you can do it.
I can't,
Tanine said, an edge of fear starting to creep into her voice.
I'll fall off and I'll die, Allison.
You won't die, Allison said firmly. You can do this as well as he can.
I can't,
Tanine insisted.
Dracos is a powerful poet warrior. I'm not.
It has nothing to do with Dracos' warrior training, Allison said. It has to do with you and me. You as Kada and me as human.
I don't understand.
Allison wrinkled her nose. This was hardly the time and place she'd planned on springing this on either of the 2 Kada, but under the circumstances, Allison didn't have much choice. I know Dracos has been walking you through the encyclopedia section of the SNA's computer, she said. Has he shown you the drawings and paintings of dragons from Earth legends?
I've seen some of them, yes.
Didn't it strike you as odd that we would have so many legends of that sort? Allison asked, especially from so many different cultures and peoples. Tanine had gone very still.
What exactly are you trying to say?
Allison took a deep breath. I'm saying that I think the Kada originally came from Earth.
That can't be,
Tanine said.
Dracos told me his people are coming here from a distant world in a very different part of the galaxy.
And so they are, Allison agreed. But he also says the whole group of them were kidnapped from their home world by passing slavers thousands of years ago. I think they just don't realize how far they've traveled before they were able to fight their way free.
Then what of my own people?
Tanine asked.
The Pukas living on Roscrovy.
Allison grimaced. Those Pukas weren't living on Roscrovy anymore, she knew. She and her associates had made sure of that. You were probably survivors of one of the battles the slavers used you for, she said. You found the Erasmus, or they found you, before your time limit was up and discovered they could serve as hosts. There was a rhythmic tapping against Allison's leg as Tanine twitched her tail restlessly.
No,
She said.
can't be! You're just guessing!
There is some guesswork involved, yes, Allison agreed. But I've got at least one bit of evidence on my side. Do you happen to remember the name Draco said their original hosts were called?
The again!
That's right, Allison said, vaguely surprised that Tanim would remember such a jaw-cracker of a word. A while back, just for fun, I looked it up. Turns out it's the old Indo-European root word for human. Tanim didn't say anything, but just kept tapping her tail against Allison's leg. I'm not the only one thinking along these lines either, Allison went on. A couple of nights ago, while we were waiting for Frost to start moving the Brumgan mercenaries, I caught Jack in the day room looking through some of the old Earth Dragon legends.
But how can this be?
Tanim asked at last.
We aren't like any other Earth creatures!
You aren't like any other creatures, period, Allison said. I'm just saying it looks more and more like you were originally designed to be companions and friends to human beings. Specifically to human beings, in fact. That's why Dracos can do things with Jack he couldn't do with the Shantine. Clearly things you and the other Pukas couldn't do with the Rasfus. With a human host, you're finally becoming the way Kadar were truly meant to be.
You say we were designed?
Tanim said.
Designed by whom?
No idea, Allison said. Passing aliens, some ancient human civilizations, genetic engineers, God himself. Take your pick. The point is that you and I are the same human Kadar team that Jack and Dracos are. If Dracos can drop safely off Jack's back over a wall, so can you.
Perhaps,
Tanim said.
But whether you're right or wrong, we have no choice, do we?
Not that I can see, Allison admitted. I'm sorry. The tapping tail slowed, then stopped.
Then I will do it!
Thank you, Allison said. All right. You remember that it was the third and fourth indentions. The combination is 3, 7, 12, 9, 20. You line up the little diamond on the rotator with the right place around the rim. Push the center of the rotator until it clicks. Then go on to the next one.
I understand,
Tanim said.
12 is the 1 and 2, correct?
Right, but the dial isn't marked with human numbers, Allison said, feeling a fresh layer of sweat ooze out onto her forehead. She'd worked with safes for so long that she didn't even think anymore about the fact that most of them used entirely different number systems. When I say 12, I mean the 12th symbol around from the top. I think it's a squiggle with a short line angled through it. The very top symbol is what I call 20. The symbol just to the right is 1, the next is 2, and so on.
I see,
Tanim said.
I should have realized that. I'm sorry.
No problems, Allison said. You ready?
3rd and 4th indentions. 3, 7, 12, 9, 20.
Tanim said.
Yes, I'm ready.
Then let's go for it, Allison said, pressing her back firmly against the metal again. Good luck. She felt Tanim move into position, peering over the wall. There was a moment of anticipation that reminded Allison somehow of her first experience gazing down from the end of the swimming pool's high dive board. And then suddenly, Tanim was gone. Allison twitched violently in reaction. The movement bumped her head against the self-destruct bomb set into the safe's ceiling. She rubbed gingerly at the spot, as if she'd needed that reminder that her fate was now directly tied to Tanim's. If the Kadar had fallen wrong and disappeared into that strange fourth-dimensional space, then Allison was also dead. Either her air would run out, or someone else would open the safe and the bomb would blow her head off. She was almost startled when, with no fuss at all, the safe door swung open at her feet. She blinked sudden tears of relief from her eyes as Tanim's gray-scaled face peered in at her.
You were right,
the Kadar said, her jaws cracking open in a wry smile.
Number 12 was a squiggle with a line through it.
Ah, Allison said, filling her lungs with fresh air as she worked her way out of the safe. Stretching stiff muscles, she looked around. The room was dark except for the handful of small red nightlights marking the door and the tastefully concealed emergency kit. Another door led off one of the side walls, its lack of red nightlights showing that it wasn't an accent.
What now?
Tanim asked quietly.
Shh,
Allison warned, touching her finger to her lips. She pulled out her mascara tube again as she moved carefully to the door. If Neverland had any brains, he would have left guards outside in the corridor. He had. 2 of them, she guessed, from the sounds of their breathing. Just as carefully, she backed away again to the farthest corner of the office. Tanim, her silver eyes glittering in the darkness, padded silently over to join her.
There are bad people out there!
The Kadam murmured. Allison nodded. 2, I think, she said. But don't worry, it doesn't sound like they're planning to come in and snoop around.
Unless we give them reason to do so.
So we make sure we don't, Allison said, trying to think. Originally, a quiet look around had been first on her list of things to do. Once she had some idea of how many men and Brumgas were on board, she would have a better idea of where the 2 of them might be able to hide for a few days. Unfortunately, both parts of the plan required her to leave the office. With a pair of Malison Ring mercenaries standing guard a foot outside the door, that was going to be a little tricky.
I see no place where we may hide for long,
Tanim said into her thoughts.
unless your breath mask can be restored.
It can be recharged somewhat, yes, Allison said, but not entirely. Certainly not enough to get us through a whole day or more in the safe.
Then we must find a new place,
The Kada concluded.
Shall I begin a search?
Allison frowned. Then suddenly she understood. The last time they were aboard, Tanim had taken herself on a brief tour of the ship's ventilation system. It could be dangerous, she warned, and not just from the ducks themselves. If someone spots you, we're both dead. The Kada twitched her tail.
So will we be if we stay here?
I can't argue with that, Allison conceded. She looked around, spotted the vent in the wall just below the ceiling. Let's get the grill off. 3 minutes later, Tanim climbed up on Allison's shoulders and eased her head and forepaws into the open vent.
It looks clear,
She said, pulling her head briefly back out again to look at Allison.
I'll be back as soon as I can.
Allison nodded. Good luck. Tanim put her head back into the opening. Pulling with her forepaws, she slid the rest of the way in, and with a flick of her tail, she was gone. Pulling out her flashlight, Allison turned it to its lowest setting and put it into the duct to give Tanim something to look for when she headed back. She then put the grill back into position, fastened the bolts just tightly enough to keep it in place. And once she'd done that, there was nothing for her to do but wait.